A poor man once set a trapped little creature free and thought that was the end of it. A few nights later, it knocked on his door, and what it did next I still can't think about without smiling. Tonight, I'll tell you a story from Japan. The road home was long that evening and cold, and the poor man walked it with his hands tucked deep in his sleeves. He did not have much: a small house, a pot that was empty more often than not. But he had a good heart, and eyes that noticed the small things other people hurried past. And that, as it turned out, would be enough. At the edge of the field, something rustled in the dry grass. A small sound, a worried little sound. He stopped and he looked, and there in the brown grass he found it. A tanuki, a Japanese raccoon dog, round and plump and thoroughly stuck, with one foot caught fast in a hunter's rope. It had quite given up struggling by the time he reached it. It simply sat there in the grass, looking terribly sorry for itself, like a dumpling that had wandered too far from home. And when it lifted its round face and saw him coming, its dark eyes went very wide, and its ears flattened as if to say, "Well, this is embarrassing. Please don't tell the other tanuki." He knelt down in the cold grass and set to work on the knot. "Hold still now, little one," he said. "Almost there. Almost." The tanuki held its breath and watched his fingers with the most enormous concentration, as though it might be able to help just by staring hard enough. And then the rope slipped loose and the round little creature tumbled backward into the grass with a soft thump, entirely and completely free. It did not run off at once. It picked itself up and shook itself out and looked back at him for a long, thoughtful moment, the way you look at someone whose face you have decided to remember. Then it was gone into the dark, and he went home and thought no more about it. Some nights later, there came a knock at his door. Soft, a little uncertain, so light that he almost missed it. He slid the door open, and no one was there at all. Only, sitting neatly on the step in the cold moonlight, looking up at him with those same round dark eyes, was the tanuki, waiting quite politely, as though it had made an appointment and arrived exactly on time. He let it in because the night was cold, and it trotted straight across the room to the fire and sat down beside it, as comfortably as if it had always lived there. And then, because this is that kind of story, it spoke. "You were kind to me," it said in a small, warm voice, "when you had no reason to be. So now it is my turn. Please, let me help you." Before he could think of a single sensible thing to say, the little creature scrunched up its round face in concentration and began to change. The plump body settled and smoothed and grew still. The soft brown fur darkened and hardened, slowly into iron. And where a round little tanuki had been sitting only a moment before, there now sat a tea kettle. Round, handsome, softly gleaming in the light of the fire, looking for all the world as though it had never been anything else. "Take me up to the temple on the hill," said the kettle in a muffled little voice. "Sell me. They love old things up there. They will pay you well." He did not much like the idea of selling a friend, but the kettle only wobbled cheerfully and said, "Go on, trust me." So in the morning he wrapped it in cloth and climbed the hill. The old priest turned the kettle over in his hands for a good long while. He tapped it with a fingernail. He held it up to the light and squinted. He turned it around and hummed a low, approving little hum. The kettle, for its part, held very still and tried its best to look like an ordinary kettle. "Yes," said the priest at last, thoroughly pleased. "A very fine old kettle indeed." And he paid the poor man more coins than he had held in years. That evening, the priest set his fine new kettle over the fire to boil water for his tea. The flames licked up around the iron. The kettle grew warm, then hot, then really quite uncomfortably, unbearably hot. And that, as it turned out, was a good deal more than the Tanuki had bargained for. Out popped a head, then a striped tail, then 4 little legs paddling wildly in the air. The kettle was half a kettle and half a Tanuki now, and it did not care for the fire one single bit. It gave a startled yelp, shot straight up off the flames like a cork from a bottle, landed on the floor with a clatter, and ran. Around the temple hall it went, half iron, half fur, little legs skidding and slipping on the polished wood, tail streaming out behind like a banner. The priest gave chase, robes flying, arms waving, calling out for it to please, please stop. The young monks sat bolt upright in their beds and stared, quite sure they must still be dreaming. Nobody in the whole long and dignified history of that temple had ever seen a tea kettle move quite so fast. By morning, the poor priest had had entirely enough. He bundled the peculiar kettle back into its cloth, marched all the way down the hill, and pressed it firmly into the poor man's arms. "It is yours," he said, quite out of breath. "Whatever it is, please, keep it." And back up the hill he hurried. The man unwrapped the cloth on his own floor, and there was the kettle blinking up at him, head, tail, 4 little legs and all, looking just a touch sheepish about the whole affair. He tried to keep a straight face. He truly, honestly did. And then it was no use at all, and he burst out laughing, the first real laugh he had laughed in a very long time. And the little creature, after a moment, seemed to grin right back up at him. "Well," he said, wiping his eyes, "I don't think we can sell you again." The Tanuki considered this. Then it brightened. "Then let us do something better. I can walk a rope. I can dance. People will pay good money to see a kettle that walks." The man looked at it, and slowly he began to smile. So he strung a long rope across the village square, and word went round that there was something worth seeing. And up went the little half-kettle, one careful paw after another. A tiny paper fan held out for balance, its nose in the air and its whiskers twitching, terribly proud of itself. The crowd held its breath as it wobbled at the middle, And then, when it reached the far side and struck a little pose, they burst into pure delight. They came from everywhere after that. One by one at first, then in whole, cheerful, chattering crowds. They gasped when the little creature wobbled. They cheered when it caught itself at the last moment. They laughed and clapped and left their coins shining in the dust. And every single night, the strange little kettle finished its walk, turned to face them all, and took a slow, solemn little bow, as if it had been born for the stage. They were not rich, exactly. Not the way people mean when they say the word. But the empty pot was never quite empty anymore. And in the evenings, when the crowds had gone home and the square was quiet, the two of them walked back together along the darkening road. The man and his ridiculous, wonderful kettle. He had been alone so long that he had quite forgotten how good it felt not to be. And now, every evening, he remembered. The seasons turned, and turned again. The rope walking grew slower with the years. The Tanuki was older now, and the roads felt longer than they used to. And some mornings it wanted nothing more than to sit by the fire and doze. The man understood. He was growing older too. Then one quiet gray morning, the Tanuki said the thing they both already knew was coming. "I am tired," it said very gently. "I think I would like to rest now, somewhere warm, somewhere safe." The man was quiet for a long moment, looking into the fire. Then he nodded because he loved it far too much to argue, and because, if he was honest, he had felt this day coming for some time. He carried it slowly back up the long hill to the temple, the same climb they had walked together so many times, in every kind of weather. It felt shorter now, far too short. At the top, a little out of breath, he asked the monks not to use the kettle, and not to sell it, only to keep it, to let it stay, to let it rest by a warm fire for as long as it wished. The priest, older now and gentler, understood without being told. He set the old kettle in a place of honor on a soft cushion, in the corner where the morning light came in. And there it stayed. And the man climbed the hill to visit again and again, and the two of them would sit together in the quiet, the way old friends do, with nothing much that needed saying. In Japan, they still tell this story. And on that hill, they say, the temple still keeps a very old tea kettle, tucked in a quiet corner, and people still climb up to see it. Perhaps that is why the old kettle was never forgotten, not because it could walk a rope or dance or earn a handful of coins, but because, for a little while, two lonely creatures had found a warm place beside each other. I keep thinking about that little kettle, taking its bow every night as if it had been born for the stage. He saved its life once, but I am honestly not sure which of them ended up rescuing the other. I wonder what you think. What about you? Good night.